This is the test in preparation for the Etheridge night poetry reading, March the 11th, Tuesday, Jefferson Hall.
My life has been a miserable failure.
Till now.
Did I put that down here? Yeah, I did. Welcome to the first spring reading in the current Friends of the Scranton Public Library Poetry series. Our reader tonight was Mr. Etheridge Knight, and I'll introduce him in just a moment. First, I want to say a couple of things. One is that the next reading will be in April, I believe April 15th, and that will be an open reading. I believe it'll be for between 6 and 8 local poets will read that night, and the committee, the Friends of the Scranton Public Library Poetry Committee, is looking for a reader or two still to round that program out. It's an open reading. We're looking for area poets who will read that night. And if you are interested in reading that night, would you please submit a sample of your work to Dave Elliott at Keystone College. He's in the Department of English up there. And you either will or will not read that night. Okay. As I think most of you know who have been here before, this series is funded by the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts and the Scranton Area Foundation. At the back, right inside the door, there's a basket which will accept any money you want to give, and there is also a book which will accept any signature you might want to enter. And it really is rather important that everyone who attend the meeting, the readings, sign that book so that the people at the state and locally who fund the series have an adequate record of how successful it is. And this is a very, very successful series. So if you would, even if your pockets are poor, if you would, please sign the book before you leave tonight. Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight is the author of several books of poetry, a collection of new and selected poems entitled Born of a Woman will soon be published. And I will introduce Mr. Knight by reading the cover jacket. It begins with one of his poems. It is hard to make a poem in prison. The air lends itself not to the singer. Then says, Etheridge Knight began writing poetry as an inmate in the Indiana State Prison during the early 60s. His frank and powerful poems depict the fractured lives of black men and women in a divided society, beset by drug addiction, as he was, by violence among themselves, and by conflict with a hostile system. Etheridge Knight's people share the need to survive, but they love too, and love proudly. The extraordinary range of his work reveals a passionate and generous intelligence, as determined, he's generally intelligent, as determined to celebrate the oppressed, as to condemn the oppressor, and as eager to praise the good in life as to protest its evil. Born of a Woman brings together Etheridge Knight's most important work from 2 decades of writing, including the best of poems from prison, published in 1968, and Belly Songs and Other Poems, 1973, along with many previously uncollected poems. The selection includes political poems, elegies, lyrics, all of them fruit of hard-earned experience. Through all of them, love is Etheridge Knight's ultimate protest, as he fashions escape after escape from the prisons of body and mind that would diminish him and his concerns. His poems take risks, but he welcomes the demands of his calling. As he himself puts it, making jazz swing in 17 syllables ain't no square poet's job. A bit of biographical information. Mr. Knight was born in Mississippi in 1931. He currently lives in Memphis, Tennessee, and he has received any number of grants and awards, et cetera, et cetera. He presently is conducting the Free People's Poetry Workshop in Memphis, and he is also editing a collection of toasts for the Center of Southern Folklore. For those who are interested, Mr. Knight's current publisher, the publisher of the soon-to-be published Born of a Woman, is Houghton Mifflin. Mr. Etheridge Knight. Yeah, now we got to.
certain the demands of technology, what I like to do is first say to you some of the poems I made up when I was in prison, and then some I made up since I've been out. I went to prison I got arrested in 1960, and I got out in 1968. And my poems first started being published in 62 or 63. I went through like 2 years of nothing but absolute rejections, you know. Every night the guy would come around with the mail and he'd put 2 or 3 letters in, or you slide them, and they don't call you by your name, they call you by your number. You know, 30,562. And I mean, I'd already been rejected, you know, by society. Then nothing but form rejects. So I'll read to you some of the poems that I made up when I was in prison, and then some I made up since I've been out. The first one I want to say to you is it's titled, Hard Rock Returns to Prison from the Hospital for the Criminal Insane. Definitions are very powerful things, and a lot of the men, especially young men in prisons who wouldn't go along with all of the bullshit rules, would be thrown in the hole in solitary confinement. If that didn't, quote, teach them their lessons, then they would be defined as crazy, and they'd be sent to mental institutions where ugly things were done to their heads. It's very easy to define a person in prison, or if you're a woman. You know, a brother can have a sister defined as crazy. A husband have a wife is crazy and put in, you know, I want her locked up. She's hysterical. She's demented. Anyway, it's titled, Hard Rock Returns to Prison from the Hospital for the Criminal Insane. Hard Rock was known not to take no shit from nobody, and he had the scars to prove it. Split purple lips, lumped ears, welts above his yellow eyes, and one long scar that cut across his temple and plowed through a thick canopy of kinky hair. The word was that Hard Rock wasn't a mean nigga anymore, that the doctors had bored a hole in his head, cut out part of his brain, and shot electricity through the rest. When they brought Hard Rock back, handcuffed and chained, he was turned loose like a freshly gelded stallion to try his new status. And we all waited and watched like Indians at a corral to see if the word was true. As we waited, we wrapped ourselves in the cloak of his exploits. Man, the last time it took 8 screws to put him in the hole. Yeah, remember when he smacked the captain with his dinner tray? He set the record for time in the hole. 67 straight days. Old Hard Rock. Man, that's one crazy nigga. And then the jewel of a myth that Hard Rock had once bit a screw on the thumb and poisoned him with syphilitic spit. The testing came to see if Hard Rock was really tame. A hillbilly called him a black son of a bitch and didn't lose his teeth. And a screw who knew Hard Rock from before shook him down and barked in his face. And Hard Rock did nothing, just grinned and looked silly, his eyes empty like knotholes in a fence. And even after we discovered that it took Hard Rock exactly 3 minutes to tell you his first name. We told ourselves that he had just wised up, was being cool, but we could not fool ourselves for long, and we turned away, our eyes on the ground, crushed. He had been our destroyer, the doer of things we dreamed of doing but could not bring ourselves to do. The fears of years, like a biting whip, had cut grooves too deeply across our backs. The next poem, He Sees Through Stone, is about an old man, do it, sure. The prison I was in is in northern Indiana, about an hour and a half from Chicago, on the east of Gary. And Dewey Sure and a couple of other old guys had come over to Indiana and tried to rob somebody. And they caught their asses and put them in penitentiary. And he served kind of as our village elder. He would hold the bets on the boxing matches, basketball games, and he'd settle arguments, and he'd tell a bunch of lies all the time. And he claimed he knew Al Capone, and in the evenings, we'd be on the yard, a lot of the young guys would gather around him, and while he'd be telling his tall tales. And they'd always be projecting a tough image, chest out. And he could see through this. He knew that they was just as scared as he was. And I made up this poem, He Sees Through Stone. He sees through stone. He has the secret eyes, this old black one who under prison skies sits pressed by the sun against the western wall, his pipe between purple gums. The years fall like overripe plums, bursting red flesh on the dark earth. His time is not my time, but I have known him in a time gone. He led me trembling cold into the dark forest, taught me the secret rites, to make it with a woman, to be true to my brothers, to make my spear drink the blood of my enemies. Now black cats circle him, flash white teeth, snarl at the air, mashing green grass beneath shining muscles, ears peeling his words. He smiles, he knows the hunt, the enemy. He has the secret eyes, he sees through stone. The violent space. I'll read to you for Freckle-Faced Gerald and the violent space, because I made them up in the same period of time. I was reading a novel by James Baldwin, and the title of it was Another Country. And I read it because in the newspapers there was a controversy going on someplace in southern Illinois because some English professor, some school had listed Another Country as suggested reading, recommended reading or something. And the novel dealt with one of the main characters was a young black man who was homosexual. He's also a musician. He was a drummer. And about a third of the way through the novel, he committed suicide because of social pressures. And I wasn't agreeing with Baldwin's portrayal of black males, because we very seldom commit suicide directly. We might kill each other, drink ourselves to death, overdose, but we don't jump off no bridges or shoot ourselves in the head. You know, it's just in our style. You know? And so I was disagreeing with Baldwin's portrayal of the character of the black male. And then that evening when dudes came in from work, he's telling me about this young black dude, Gerald. He's 16 years old, and he had been raped in the prison laundry by some of the older convicts. So I made up this poem for him, for freckled-faced Gerald. Now, you take old Rufus. He beat drums, was free and funky under the arms, fucked white girls, jumped off a bridge, and thought nothing of the sacrilege. He copped out, and he was over 21. Take Gerald. 16 years, hadn't even done a good job on his voice. He didn't even know how to talk tough or how to hide the glow of life before he was thrown in as pig meat for the buzzards to eat. Gerald, who had no memory or hope of copper hot lips or firm upthrusting thighs to reinforce his flow, let tall walls and buzzards change the course of his river from south to north. No safety in numbers like back on the block. 2's are plenty. 3, definitely not. 4, you all Muslims. 5, you were planning a race riot. Plus, Gerald could never quite win with his precise speech and innocent grin the trust and fists of the young black cats. Gerald, sun-kissed 10,000 times on the nose and cheeks, didn't stand a chance. Didn't even know that the loss of his balls had been plotted years in advance by wiser and bigger buzzards than those who now hover above his track and at night light upon his back. A fun poem of mine I call is The Warden Said to Me the Other Day. It's a fact that in the springtime, the escape rate goes up in prisons, especially among the young men. When the sap started rising in the trees, you guys started getting somewhere, you know. And this warden didn't understand biology or nothing at all, you know. I mean, you know, his job was to keep him there. Well, anyway, this particular day, about 5 or 6 guys outside the wall said, escape, you know, man, you know, it's springtime, the birds sing. And he come and he asked me, you know, if I, you know, had the answer. So anyway, I made up this poem. The warden said to me the other day, the warden said to me the other day, innocently I think, say, Etheridge, how come the black boys don't run off like the white boys do? I lowered my jaw and scratched my head and said, innocently I think, well, sir, I ain't for sure, but I reckon it's 'cause we ain't got nowheres to run to. Let me say to y'all 2 or 3 more poems I made up in prison. The violent space, or when your sister sleeps around for money. I made this up just about during the same time I made a poem for Freckle-Faced Gerald. And it's because I was thinking about certain violences. I had been involved with a couple of women who had been into the streets and they told me about some kinds of violence. And I was thinking that the only men who could probably relate to certain fears that women have were young men in prison. If the average man, if I'm walking down a dark alley and I got some money in my pocket, I have a fear. The fear is that somebody might knock me in the head and take my money. But the fear is not that I'm going to be sexually assaulted. And young men in prison are the only ones I think that could probably relate to the fear that a lot of women have. And she was telling me about all these fears and the violence there. Anyway, the violent space, or when your sister sleeps around for money. Exchange in greed the ungraceful signs, thrust the thick notes between green apple breasts, then the shadow of the devil descends, the violent space cries and angel eyes, large and dark retreat in innocence and in ice. Run, sister, run, the booger man comes. The violent space cries silently, like you cried wide years ago in another space, speckled by the sun and the leaves of a green plum tree, and you were stung by a red wasp, and we flew home. Run, sister, run, the booger man comes. Well, hell, little sis, wasps still sting. You are all of 17 and as alone now in your pain as you were with the sting on your brow. Well, shit, little sis, what should I do? Should I squat in the dust and make strange markings on the ground? Shall I chant a spell to drive the demon away? Run, sister, run, the booger man comes. In the beginning you were the Virgin Mary, and you are the Virgin Mary now. But somewhere between Nazareth and Bethlehem, you lost your name in the nameless void. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Oh, Mary, shake your butt to the violent juke, absorb the demon puke, and watch the white eyes pop. Run, sister, run, the booger man comes. And what do? I boil my tears in a twisted spoon and dance like an angel on the point of a needle. I sit counting syllables like Midas gold. I am not bold. I cannot yet take hold of the demon and lift his weight from your black belly. So I grab the air and sing my song, but the air cannot stand my singing long. Top out session. There are, you know how we get into any of the art disciplines, and we get to categorizing. And there's one category that's called confessional poetry that deals really with the I. And usually it's a stage where it ain't moved from the I to the we. You know, it's always, you know. The poetic I is equivalent to the editorial we. You know, it's I. Well, and sometimes the religiousness has always known that confession is sometimes good for the soul. So this is it's called cop-out session. I done shot dope, been to jail, swilled wine, ripped off sisters, passed bad checks, changed my name, howled at the moon, wrote bad poems, turned back over flips, flipped over backwards. In other words, I've been confused, fucked up, phony, scared, and jive to a whole lot of people. Haven't you, in one way or another? Anybody else want to cop out? I'll say 2 or 3 more poems from that I made up when I was in prison. Then one, Langston Hughes, one of my mentors, and he died when I was in prison. And when I was a boy, in my teens, one of my group's favorite singers was Billie Holiday, and she had a record. It's called Strange Fruit. The beginning stanza of Strange Fruit went, "A southern tree bears a strange and bitter fruit, blood on the leaves and blood on the roots, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees." And years later, after I got grown, I found out that that was a poem of Langston Hughes that Billie Holiday had ran across and liked and it put to music. So when I heard that Langston Hughes had died, I made a poem for him. For Langston Hughes, gone, gone, another weaver of black dreams has gone. We sat in Junebug's pad with the shades drawn and the air thick with holy smoke, and we heard the ladies sing Langston before we knew his name. And when black bodies stopped swinging, Junebug, TG, and I went out and swung on some white cats. Now, I don't think the myth maker meant for us to do that, but we didn't know what else to do. Gone, gone, another weaver of black dreams has gone. Another short poem. It's titled Apology for Apostasy. I made this poem up after reading a review in the New York Times book review section. When I was in prison, I used to read it religiously because I thought that's what all poets and artists, if you didn't read the New York Times book review, you weren't literary. How little I knew. Gwendolyn Brooks had published her second book of poetry, and is a very well-known, this was in the early 60s, understand the history, and at that particular time, in the early 60s, a great hue and cry was going out all across academia, and the various English professors and poets and critics were saying, we're not reaching universality. And that's what this dude was saying. What he said, essentially, Gwendolyn Brooks, was that he doubted if she could quote, write. Poets don't write no way. They sing or say. But he said, he died if she could write without making the reader aware that number one, she was black, number two, she was a woman. And he implied that if being a woman or being black was all she had to talk about, it didn't reach universality. So all I could do was make up a poem since I was in penitentiary. I guess I can do it on the outside. It's called Apology for Apostasy. Soft songs like birds die in poison air, so my song cannot now be candy. Anger rots the oak and elm. Roses are rare, seldom seen through blind despair, and my murmur cannot be heard above the din and dam. The night is full of boogers and bastards. No moon or stars light the sky, and my candy is deferred till peacetime, when my voice shall be light like down lilting in the air. Then shall I sing of beaches white in the magic sun, and of moons and maidens at midnight. I want to read to you my favorite anecdote. Rehabilitation and Treatment. It was told to me by Joe Martinez, a Mexican American. He spent 25, 30 years in various prisons, Texas, Huntsville. And he used to always say to me, "Hey, Etheridge, I'm living proof that reformatories don't reform and prisons don't rehabilitate, else I wouldn't have had to spend 25, 30 years in one. You know, if you got arthritis, you go to the doctor for 30 years, he ain't cured you, shit." You know what I mean? Something's going on. You know? So, it's like rehabilitation and treatment. The convict strolled into the prison administration building to get assistance and counseling for his personal problems. Just inside the main door were several other doors proclaiming parole, counselor, chaplain, doctor, teacher, correction, and therapist. The convict chose the door marked correction, inside of which were two other doors, custody and treatment. He chose treatment and was confronted with two more doors, juvenile and adult. He chose the proper door and again was faced with two doors, previous offender and first offender. Once more, he walked through the proper door and again, two doors, Democrat and Republican. He was a Democrat, and so he hurried through that door and ran smack into two more doors, black and white. He was black, and so he rushed through that door and fell 9 stories to the street. If Joe, you know, if I had, if Joe was still living, he got out after about 25 years and then died 2 months ago. But hey, there is so many things going on in the language that most of us don't pay attention to. Poets should pay attention to, since the language, since words are their major tools in the making up of a story like this, an anecdote like this. there should have been two other doors. It should have been marked male and female. I began to understand, somebody pointed out to me, a certain woman pointed out to me, and it's true. And in the poem, I said, I forgot what poem it was, but there are things, we'll have a talk after, but there are things in the language that as people who use the language ought to be aware of, the racism and the sexism in the language that's almost unconscious. Anyway, I'll read some more poems. Here's one. Upon your leaving, for Sonia, night, and in the warm blackness, your woman smell filled the room, and our rivers flowed together, became one, my love's patterns. Our sweat-drenched bellies made flat cracks as we kissed, like sea waves lapping against the shore, rocks rising and rolling and sliding back. And your sighs softly calling my name became love song, child woman songs old as 1,000 years, new as the few smiles you released like sacred doves. And I fell asleep, ashamed of my glow, of my halo, and ignoring them who waited below to take you away when the sun rose. Day and the sunlight playing in the leaves above us fell across your face, traced the tears in your eyes and love patterns in the wet grass. And as they waited inside in triumphant patience to take you away, I begged you to stay. But Etheridge, you said, I don't know what to do. And the love pattern shifted and shimmered in your eyes. And after they had taken you and gone, the day turned stark white, bleak, barren like the Nordic landscape. I turned and entered into the empty house and fell on the floor, laughing, trying to fill the spaces your love had left, knowing that we would not remain apart long. Our rivers had flowed together. We are one and are strong. This next one, it's titled Feeling Fucked Up. It's the same poem. It's a poem about the same woman. I got a telephone call one night. I was in Nashville, Tennessee. And she called me and said, I divorced you. Hung up the phone. And the next day I was going to Hartford, Connecticut, and I was on the airplane, and I had about 3 or 4 of them scotches and things, and I got to thinking about it. And I was feeling fucked up, and so I titled the poem, Feeling Fucked Up. Lord, she's gone, done left me, done packed up and split, and I with no way to make her come back, and everywhere the world is bare, bright bone white crystal sand glistens, Dope, death, dead, dying and jiving drove her away, made her take her laughter and her smiles and her softness and her midnight sighs. Fuck Coltrane and music and clouds drifting in the sky. Fuck the sea and trees and the sky and birds and alligators and all the animals that roam the earth. Fuck Marx and Mayo. Fuck Fidel and Nkrumah and democracy and communism. Fuck smack and pot and red ripe tomatoes. Fuck Joseph, fuck Mary, fuck God, Jesus, and all the disciples. Fuck Fanon, Nixon, and Malcolm. Fuck the revolution, fuck freedom, fuck the whole thing. All I want now is my woman back so my soul can sing. Dark prophecy, I sing of shine. This poem is out of a black male oral tradition. Very few of these poems have been published until recently. They're like folk poems, folk songs. Until like 7 years ago, none of them had been published. And like folk tales and things, they usually deal with personified animals, catastrophes. Anyway, this particular one has to do with shine and sinking of the Titanic. And yeah, brothers, while white America sings about the unsinkable Molly Brown, who was hustling the Titanic when it went down, I sing to thee of Shine, the stoker, who was free enough to flee the fucking ship and let the white folks drown with screams on their lips. Jumped his black ass in the dark sea, Shine did, broke free from the straining steel. Yeah, I sing of Shine and how the millionaire banker ran on the deck and pulled from his pockets $1 million check, saying, Shine, Shine, save poor me, and I'll give you all the money a black boy needs. And how Shine looked at the money and then at the sea and said, jump in, motherfucker, and swim like me. And Shine swam on, and Shine swam on. And how the banker's daughter ran naked on the deck with her pink tits trembling and her pants round her neck, saying, Shine, Shine, save poor me, and I'll give you all the pussy a black boy needs. And how Shine said, now pussy's good, and that's no jive, but you got to swim, not fuck, to stay alive. And Shine swam on, and Shine swam on. And how Shine swam past the preacher, floating on a board, crying, save me, nigga, Shine, in the name of the Lord. And how the preacher grabbed the Shine's arm and broke his stroke, and Shine pulled his shank and cut the preacher's throat. And Shine swam on, and Shine swam on. And when the news hit shore that the Titanic had sunk, Shine was up in Harlem, damn near drunk. You know, when I first started reading my poems around, after I got out of penitentiary, it's something about the ego of the poet. And I've learned that more and more that you get into poetry, into any art, it's about the dissolution of the ego, not the enlarging the ego. At first, I used to read nothing but my poems. I mean, I do read, but after a while, you incorporate some of the poems by poets that you understand. I want to read to you a poem by a woman poet who lived it was near here in Binghamton, Heather McHugh. The poem is titled Housewife. Housewife. I want to be whipped again, whole day on the floor, upon my knees, stripping them clean, while men sleep in a nearby room. Dying to please, pleased to die, I wait for someone to wake up, grab a strap, do me in. Outside, in fact, the day is soft and not a killer. Children and noises slip on it without falling. Where have I been? After a week, the scraps begin to rot in the sink. Can't be hip doing dishes, baby, flipping plates, stacking the rack. I might as well have wanted to be born black as to be free of these wishes. Now a door slams open. They begin to stumble out, awaking to want, to shake the kitchen down, break open cabinets. They grub and rummage and drop the empty cups. I hear a curse like a ketchup bottle hit the tiles, and I start taking off. I do start taking off. Already one of them is playing with his belt as if it were a sweet thought. Already I have fought and felt the long line of it coming true, and my own coming, and across my back my whole life humming. I'll read two more, a Watt's Mother and a title poem, Belly Song. And then, if anybody had, we're talking about any questions, comments, conversations. A Watt's Mother Mourns While Burning Beans is an old poem. It's one I made up when I was in prison, and Belly Song was after. A Watt's mother mourns while boiling beans. Everybody remembers Watts. Anybody here don't know Watts? You know what Watts means? It's on the national consciousness. The blooming flower of my life is roaming in the night, and I think surely that never since he was born have I been free of fright. My boy is bold, and his blood grows quickly hot. Even now, he could be crawling in the street, bleeding out his life, likely as not. Come home, my bold and restless son. Stop my heart's yearning. But I must quit this thinking. My husband is coming, and the beans are burning. Belly Song for the Daytop family. And it begins with an epigram, some lines from a poem by a young woman poet, Sarah Mansfield. It's a poem that she had written to me when I was in jail in Connecticut. And those lines go, "You have made something out of the sea that blew and rolled you on its salt, bitter lips. It nearly swallowed you. But I hear you are tough and harder to swallow than most." Belly Song. And I And I must admit that the sea in you has sung to the sea in me. And I must admit that the sea in me has fallen in love with the sea in you, because you have made something out of the sea that nearly swallowed you. And this poem I give to you. This poem is a song I sing to you from the bottom of the sea in my belly. This poem is a song about feelings, about the bone of feeling, about the stone of feeling, and the feather of feeling. This poem is a death chant and a gravestone and a prayer for the dead, for young Jackie Robinson, a moving black warrior who walked among us with a wide stride and heavy heels, moving through the blood and mud and shit of Vietnam, moving through the blood and mud and dope of America, for Jackie, who was a song and a stone and a feather of feelings, now dead and gone in this month of love. And this poem is for me and the days that lay in the back of my mind when the sea rose up to swallow me, and the streets I walked were lonely streets, were stone cold streets. This poem is for me and the nights when I wrapped my feelings in a sheet of ice and stared at the stars through iron bars and cried in the middle of my eyes. This poem is for me and my woman and the yesterdays when she opened to me like a flower and I fell on her like a stone. I fell on her like a stone. And now, in my 40th year, I have come here to this house of feelings, to this singing sea, and I must admit that the sea in me has fallen in love with the sea in you, because the sea that now sings in you is the same sea that nearly swallowed you and me too. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions, comments?
I'd like to hear an idea of ancestry.
The idea of ancestry. That's what we read at the I made up the idea of ancestry when I started. The initial creative impulse came. I was doing some time in the hole, and being in solitary, show you about words. In the penitentiary, there are like 3 or 4 different places where you're locked up by yourself. And they got different names for it, but it means the same thing. Administrative segregation, isolation, solitary. No, but what it means is that you're locked in a little space by yourself. It's really next to the graveyard. And I started off this poem because after a while, the first couple of days when you're in solitary, you're still cranked up from whatever the incident was that caused you to be there. And you know, you're thinking about that and you're still tense from that. And around the fourth, fifth day after you know, you do push-ups and you play with yourself and you, but then after about the eighth or ninth day, you start getting disoriented. You forget what day of the week it is, what day of the month, and you try to latch on to frames of references. And this particular time, I spent remembering my relatives. And I remembered later that I had done the same thing when I was a child. It's got to do with relationship. You notice children will write down the names of their cousins and mothers, uncles, and blah. At least I did. You know, it's trying to get some sense of who you are and where you're at. And that's what this poem is about. The idea of ancestry. Taped to the wall of my cell are 47 pictures, 47 black faces. My father, mother, grandmothers, one dead, grandfathers, both dead, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, cousins, first and second, nieces and nephews. They stare across the space at me, sprawling on my bunk. I know their dark eyes, they know mine. I know their style, they know mine. I am all of them, they are all of me. They are farmers, I am a thief. I am me, they are thee. I have at one time or another been in love with my mother, one grandmother, two sisters, two aunts, one went to the asylum, and 5 cousins. I am now in love with a 7-year-old niece. She sends me letters written in large block print, and her picture is the only one that smiles at me. I have the same name as one grandfather, 3 cousins, 3 nephews, and 1 uncle. The uncle disappeared when he was 15, just took off and caught a freight, they say. He's discussed each year when the family has a reunion. He causes uneasiness in the clan. He is an empty space. My father's mother, who is 93 and who keeps the family Bible with everybody's birth dates and death dates in it, always mentions him. There is no place in her Bible for whereabouts unknown. Each fall, the graves of my grandfathers call me. The brown hills and red gullies of Mississippi send out their electric messages, galvanizing my genes. Last year, like a Simon quitting the cold ocean, leaping and bucking up his birth stream, I hitchhiked my way from LA with 16 caps in my pocket and a monkey on my back. And I almost kicked it with the kinfolk. I walked barefooted in my grandmother's backyard. I smelled the old land and the woods. I sipped corn whiskey from fruit jars with the men. I flirted with the women. I had a ball till the caps ran out and my habit came down. That night, I looked at my grandmother and split. My guts were screaming for junk, but I was almost contented. I had almost caught up with me. The next day in Memphis, I cracked a crocus crib for a fix. This year, there is a gray stone wall damming my stream, and when the falling leaves stir my jeans, I pace my cell or flop on my bunk and stare at 47 black faces across the space. I am all of them, they are all of me. I am me, they are thee, and I have no sons to float in the space between. You see how certain ideas are perpetuated if you ain't careful as a poet or writer, if you ain't careful about the language you use. That is one of the last line. I have no sons to float. Is that where I got confronted? In new and selected poems that's coming out in June, I changed that to, and I have no children. You know, that inherent in the language, and since poets are supposed, that's their major tool. They're supposed to be aware, and you know, I was John Wayne-ish. I could just as easily said, I have no children to float in space. Still, I ain't no sons. You know. Anybody got any questions, comments, confrontations? Uh-huh. No, a lot of poets impressed me, but I think the poet that I'm most influenced by, Gwendolyn Brooks and Dudley Randall, of the older poets, Langston Hughes, Emily Dickinson, Whitman was out of sight. I mean, his stuff was so wide, you know. I mean, but poets, I think my major woman tar was Gwendolyn Brooks, and my major mentor was probably Walt Whitman. But you know, there was Robert Bly and Galway Connell, James Wright, a lot of, you know, and when, after I started getting published, when I was in the joint, lots of poets, you know, would send me stuff and we'd correspond. Dudley Randall, you know, he's one of my major influences. He and Gwendolyn Brooks would come down and visit me in a joint. And she's the one who turned me on to haiku. Later I asked her why. You know, she said because she was too wordy. You know, you know, you know that there's a power in the word, and so I figured the bigger the word, the bigger the power. Yeah, that's logical.
She came here 2 years ago to Scranton, Gwendolyn Brooks did.
She did, yeah. And you know, she really taught me about using words to make up images, rather than just delivering concepts, intellectual concepts. Because